this hammer, it doesn't just strike iron. It holds up the roof and the trust between my wife and me. One misty morning, the sharp clang of hammer blows echoed through the valley. Inside a small forge, Thomas Smith, the poor blacksmith, worked bare-chested, sweat mixing with coal dust, his eyes glowing with the red of the fire. Outside, the old tin roof rattled every time the wind swept down from the hill. The man had only his calloused hands, a heavy hammer, a dim furnace, and his gentle wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth stepped in, carrying a tray of water, her voice soft yet steady. "Rest a little, or you'll collapse. I don't want to see you fall right here in this forge." Thomas smiled, his voice hoarse but warm. "As long as I still breathe and hold this hammer, our table will never be empty." In the small village by the forest, people valued sweat more than promises. There. Thomas was known not as a rich man, but as one who stood tall and kept a clean heart. He forged knives and hoes, and sometimes fixed a door hinge for a neighbor in exchange for some flour or a bundle of vegetables. Life was simple, but in that simplicity, they found happiness. Until the shadow of a black horse appeared. A black horse with a silver saddle, hooves pounding the dirt road. Its rider, cloaked in deep crimson, was Edward Blackwell, the ruthless lord of the region. He was wealthy, his land stretching to the foot of the mountains, with soldiers, gold, and the power of life and death in his grasp. He was infamous for three things: greed, cruelty, and his taste for testing people with temptation. Edward halted before the forge, his eyes sweeping the place before resting on Elizabeth. His cold gaze narrowed slightly, like a hawk spotting prey. "Blacksmith," he said, his voice slicing each word. "I hear you are skilled with iron. I need a suit of armor, brighter than anyone has ever seen in this land. Can you make it?" Thomas bowed his head, answering slowly, "My lord, I can try. But fine steel, much fire, long hours, all demand labor and patience." Edward smirked. "Labor and patience. Ha, I pay in gold. I want it fast, and I want it beautiful. Remember, not only beautiful, it must make any knight who wears it blaze like a god." His words hung in the forge, leaving a long trail of unease in Elizabeth's mind. She glanced at Thomas, then at the lord who tightened the reins with deliberate slowness. In his eyes, there was not only command, but a twisted delight, as if he was setting a trap. When Edward finally rode off, the sound of hooves fading into the woods, Elizabeth lay her hand on Thomas's arm. "Did you see his eyes? He doesn't just want armor." Thomas stayed silent. He knew. But he also knew that refusing would bring ruin, not only to the forge, but to their roof, and to his wife. Days passed. Nights fell. The forge glowed like a heart under pressure. Thomas hammered endlessly, each strike like a dialogue with fate. Elizabeth brought meals, but he let them grow cold. His eyes were bloodshot. "On the third night," Elizabeth whispered, "do you think, maybe we should leave this village? I don't believe that Lord will stop at just one suit of armor." Thomas set down his hammer, his hand trembling. "I was born here. If I leave, who am I? And if we run, he'll take it as sport to hunt us. No, I must forge. I must face him." The first turning point had come, a trial not only of burning steel, but of a wife's loyalty, of their faith in their home. On the day of delivery, Edward returned on horseback. He dismounted, ran his hand across the shining armor polished like a mirror, and sneered, "Beautiful, just as I wanted. But not enough." He lifted his head, locking eyes with Elizabeth standing behind Thomas. "You will make me a horse, not an ordinary one, a noble steed, a horse that makes the whole land bow as I ride through. Elizabeth's breath quickened, and her hand clutched Thomas's shirt tightly. In her heart, suspicion grew. How much more would he demand? And when would the thing he wanted no longer be iron and steel, but her very heart? Thomas looked at his wife. He understood, but before him loomed the dark shadow of the Lord's power. He nodded, as if swallowing a blade into his chest. The armor was done, but the noble steed was only the beginning of the trial. Precious horse. He does not need gold. He wants to take it with your blood, Elizabeth whispered in the night. Her voice was hoarse, trembling like a thin thread. In the forge, the fire still smouldered, glowing coals casting their light across Thomas's gaunt face. His hands were calloused, seeping blood, yet he clutched the hammer as if gripping his own fate. He did not answer, only sat in silence, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks of the wooden door. The next morning, Lord Edward Blackwell's soldiers arrived. Their armor gleamed, boots pounded heavily, carrying with them a cold command. Blacksmith Thomas Smith will forge the saddle, the bridle, and the iron shoes for my lord's prized horse. If not, this forge will turn to ashes, and your wife will belong to the Lord. Elizabeth froze. Her face turned pale. Thomas only nodded, his voice raspy. I will do it. That very afternoon, the soldiers led in a massive white horse. Muscles rippled across its body, its mane flew wild, its eyes burned red like embers. It tossed its mane and neighed so loudly it seemed to tear the sky apart. One soldier puffed his chest with pride. This is a purebred steed of the north. Lord Edward traded an entire vault of gold for it. Now he wants to wear the iron shoes of the gods. Thomas stepped closer. He placed his hardened hand upon the horse's neck. The beast jerked violently, nearly throwing him to the ground. Elizabeth cried out in alarm. Thomas, stay away from it. But Thomas only smiled. A weary smile. It is wild, impossible to tame. Just like our fate. In the days that followed, the forge burned not only with steel, but also with the steaming breath of the fierce horse. Thomas forged the iron shoes while struggling to make the beast yield. He stroked its mane, fed it, endured its bite on his shoulder, a kick that nearly broke his arm. Blood trickled, mixing with ash and soot. Elizabeth watched, her heart shattering. Every strike of the hammer felt like it landed upon her chest. Fear, doubt, helplessness. On the seventh night, she could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out, Thomas, what are you doing this for? He has gold, soldiers, and all the power. You only have me. You will lose me if you keep bowing to him. Thomas lifted his head. His eyes were tired yet blazed with light. Elizabeth, it is because I only have you that I cannot let go of this hammer. If I give up, we lose everything. But if I succeed, perhaps I will find a way to defy him. Elizabeth turned away, her heart wavering. Her faith shook, like a candle flame before the wind. Then the appointed day came. The horse bore gleaming iron shoes, a silver inlaid saddle, reins radiant as moonlight. Edward appeared, mounted, throwing back his head in laughter. The pounding hooves struck the ground like war drums, making the entire village tremble. Everyone bowed their heads, avoiding his gaze. Edward pulled the horse to a halt before the forge. He caressed the shining saddle, then fixed his eyes on Elizabeth. His gaze was like a blade, cold and sharp. Beautiful, you are skilled, but it is not enough. He leaned forward, his voice hissing through clenched teeth. Blacksmith, this time you will forge gold, turn iron into gold. If you succeed, you will be as rich as a king. If not, your wife will belong to me." Elizabeth gasped, choking on her breath. She clutched Thomas's arm, trembling. "No, impossible. No one can turn iron into gold. He wants to destroy us," the village murmured. One whispered, "It cannot be done." Another shuddered. "The Lord only mocks him to crush his spirit." Thomas remained silent. In his eyes, the forge's flames flickered, sometimes bright, sometimes dim. He knew this was the final trap, a trap with no way out. That night, Elizabeth wept by the hearth. "Thomas, he will take me. He wants to tear us apart. We must leave. Let us flee this village, go anywhere, as long as we escape him." Thomas gripped her hand tightly, trembling. "Do you still believe in me? If you do, let me try. This is the last trial. If I succeed, we will no longer bow our heads. If I fail, I would rather die in this forge than let you fall into his hands." Elizabeth sobbed uncontrollably. Inside her, anger and love collided. She felt as if he were hurling himself into the fire, leaving her behind. Yet deep down, one fragile thread still held her fast love. And then, in the dark of night, the hammer rang again. But this time it did not strike iron. It struck faith. It struck the limits of mankind. The forge's fire flared differently, no longer red, but blue, cold as the gaze of the gods. The villagers whispered, "Is it a miracle, or is fate itself testing the blacksmith?" The prized horse had been shod, but the true trial had only just begun. A wager of life and death: either turn iron into gold, or lose everything. Turn iron into gold. That's not forging, that's suicide. Elizabeth whispered in the darkness. The fire in the furnace flickered across her face, pale and desperate. Thomas sat before the glowing coals, his trembling hand resting on the hammer. He stayed silent for a long time, then answered softly, his voice like the wind whistling through the cracks of a door. "But if I don't try, we lose everything. If I try, at least there's still a spark of hope." That night, Thomas did not sleep. He threw iron into the furnace and struck relentlessly. Each blow of the hammer was a prayer. But iron remained iron. It glowed red. It softened. Then it cooled. No gold. Elizabeth watched her husband collapse with exhaustion. The pain tore her in two. She knelt beside him, whispering, "I'd rather leave the village, rather live poor somewhere else. I don't need gold. I don't need power. I only need you alive." Thomas smiled, his eyes blazing. "I swear, whether it's to a god or a demon, I will beg. If this love has value, it will turn iron into gold." And with that, he swung the hammer again. On the third night, the miracle came. As the hammer struck, sparks shot out in a brilliant blue, forming a circle in the air. For an instant, the iron in the furnace gleamed, shifting into a dazzling golden hue. Elizabeth cried out in shock. "Thomas, it changed." He froze. Sweat and tears mingled on his face, in his chest. His heart pounded like a war drum. This was not just steel. This was faith. Faith had done the impossible. But before the miracle could spread, Edward's soldiers arrived. They shouted, pounding at the door. "The Lord wants gold. Hand it over." Thomas clutched the golden iron. Elizabeth whispering, "Don't give it to him. This isn't just gold. This is our blood, our love." Thomas nodded. He wrapped the gold in cloth and hid it beneath the coals. When the soldiers stormed in, he showed them only an ordinary piece of steel. "I haven't succeeded yet." The commander roared, "You dare deceive the Lord!" They bound Thomas and dragged him to the square. Elizabeth ran after them, screaming hoarsely, "Stop, don't kill him," in the castle courtyard. Edward sat on his throne, his white horse neighing fiercely behind him. He squinted at Thomas, then sneered, "You dare defy me. I'll give you one last chance. In front of the villagers, forge iron into gold. If you fail, your wife will mount my horse." Elizabeth collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "Thomas, I don't need gold. I only need you." Thomas lifted his head, his voice booming. "You have gold, horses, soldiers, but you don't have this." He pointed to his chest. "An honest heart, a true love. That is what turns iron into gold." He stepped to the furnace prepared for the trial. The villagers held their breath. Edward smirked, convinced Thomas was about to die in disgrace. Thomas hurled the iron into the fire. He struck with the hammer, once, twice, thrice. Blue sparks exploded again, lighting up the square. The iron shifted color, glowing with brilliant gold. The villagers erupted in cheers. Edward leapt to his feet in shock. He lunged forward, reaching for the golden bar. But Thomas turned, raising the hammer high, shouting, "This is not gold for the wicked. This is gold for justice, for truth." He hurled the gold into the crowd. Poor hands seized it, holding it as though sacred. The square roared. "Thomas! Thomas! The blacksmith has turned iron into gold." Edward bellowed, drawing his sword. Kill him now." But something strange happened. His white horse neighed wildly, throwing him to the ground. It stomped, eyes glowing red, turning against its cruel master as if even the horse rejected him. The villagers, long oppressed, rose in fury. They rushed the soldiers, toppling them. Hoes and shovels became weapons. Shouts thundered louder than steel. No more fear, no more lord. Edward thrashed, but was pinned down. Thomas approached, hammer raised, but he did not strike. He looked Edward straight in the eyes, voice resounding. "You live on greed, on the blood of others. Today, you will not pay with death, but with the contempt of this entire village." The villagers bound Edward and cast him beyond the gates. The white horse neighed long and loud, then galloped away, abandoning its former master. That evening, the square glowed with gold, but not from the bar of metal, but from the eyes of people filled with faith. Elizabeth stepped forward, embracing Thomas, tears mixing with her smile. "I was wrong to doubt you. I forgot that your greatest strength is not the hammer, not the fire, but your heart." Thomas stroked her hair, his voice warm as a gentle breeze. "We have won, not because of gold, but because of love. Gold fades, but love does not." The villagers roared in triumph. They raised their hammers and hoes high, chanting Thomas's name. The poor blacksmith had turned iron into gold, but more than that, he had turned fear into courage, darkness into light. Edward vanished from that land. They say he wandered, abandoned by those who once flattered him. No horse, no gold, no power, only a cursed name. As for Thomas and Elizabeth, they returned to their humble forge. Still the red fire, still the ringing hammer. But now not only for survival, each strike was a hymn declaring righteousness will prevail. The story ends there. The good kept their happiness. The wicked were punished. And the lesson shone as brightly as that golden bar: wealth does not belong to the greedy. True strength lies in an honest heart and in love that cannot be shaken.